Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar from the Ecke Ranch. Our topic for today's discussion is successfully propagating poinsettias. This is the first session in our 2010 summer webinar series. At the end of today's presentation, I'll give you the dates and topics for future webinars so you can watch your emails for invitations. My name is Rebecca Siemonsma. I'm the Technical Services Manager for the Ecke Ranch, and I also have Roger Kehoe, Key Account Sales Manager and Technical Services for the Ecke Ranch.
Hello everyone. Good to have you with us today as we start our new poinsettia season. It's hard to believe we're already there. Summer is arrived and it's time to propagate poinsettias.
It is time to propagate poinsettias. We thought this was a timely topic because most of you have either received cuttings and are in propagation right now or getting ready to receive your cuttings. So today's discussion is timely. We'll go ahead and get started. Of course, like we do all of our webinars, you can hear us, but we can't hear you. That doesn't mean that we don't encourage you to ask questions throughout the presentation. You'll be able to use the question and answer toolbar to the right of your screen, and we will have periodic stops throughout the presentation to address questions. But you can be typing away at your questions anytime, and then we'll go ahead and stop and look through those. Today's session is also being recorded. If those of you who have not checked out On Media on our website, it's at www.ecke.com. We do record all of our webinars, and then they can be viewed at your convenience later there at On Media. So you just follow the link on the home page, and then a list of webinars will come up, and you just choose the one that you want to view. So you can do that later at your convenience, and it will include the audio session. Okay, with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. First, just an overview of stock program at the Ecke Ranch and what it takes to send a URC cutting or a callus cutting to our customers. These are our two farms here in Guatemala, located near Antigua. And these are just some images of poinsettia stock in Guatemala. We do offer different cutting sizes, which I'll show you in the next screen, but just a good example of what our stock looks like in the greenhouses in Guatemala. They are grown in the ground. And then you can see, like in the picture on the right, where it says 1.5 inch, this is an example of stock that we use for the Euro style cutting, the smaller size cutting. And then this picture here shows the different examples of the 3 cutting sizes that we do offer as a URC from the Ecke Ranch. There's the 1.5 inch Euro style cutting, the 2 inch standard, and then the 3 inch, we call it the 3 inch direct stick cutting because its original concept was to be used for direct sticking. Now with these different cutting sizes, cutting calipers should stay the same. We treat the stock differently with growth regulators and fertility management and the way that we harvest the cuttings to keep the cutting caliper the same. So just because you get the 1.5 inch Euro cutting doesn't mean that it should be caliper should be the same. It shouldn't be a smaller size cutting. That's really the goal when we ship these different sizes, is that you get the same maturity cutting and same caliper, just different stem length for different uses in the greenhouse. So before we jump into the culture part of today's presentation, we're just going to kind of go through a broad overview of the different reasons why things could go poorly in propagation, and then we'll address each of those issues as we go through the presentation. Top 5 reasons why propagation can go poorly would be that the greenhouse is too bright. Usually for propagation we don't recommend any more than 1,800-foot candles for those first couple weeks in propagation. Too wet, so whether it's too much mist if you're propagating in traditional cells, or direct stick if the media is too wet. Too little humidity, so if it's a dry environment, those cuttings are really going to have to struggle to maintain their turbidity, and you can start to see things like leaf roll. And when the humidity is little, you're going to have when the humidity is too low, you're going to have to use more mist to compensate, and then there's repercussions from the excessive mist. So rapid environmental changes are also a challenge, and that can be a reason that propagation would go poorly. And then poor sanitation, and that'll be the first topic that we discuss, is having your greenhouse ready to go and properly sterilized to receive those cuttings. So once we get past sticking, we'll address the top 5 reasons for why we would have slow or uneven rooting. Those reasons would be that it's too cold in the greenhouse, so if night temperatures are too cold or there's absence of bottom heat, that can result in slow rooting. If it's too wet, again, if you're having to use too much mist because it's too bright or there's too much airflow, or just too much mist in general, that's going to result in slow and uneven rooting. Too dark, so less than 1,000-foot candles, you will see slow rooting. Too much growth regulator can also result in slow rooting, and then too bright. And then once we get into propagation and the cuttings are actively growing and rooting, there's top 5 reasons for uneven growth, which would include not grading at plant. We do our best to ship the most consistent cuttings we can possible, but if you're, like for example, if you're direct sticking, multiple plants per container and you're not grading those cuttings according to size when you're sticking, ultimately it will more than likely result in uneven growth. So that is important when you're sticking. Late growth regulator applications can result in uneven growth, uneven temperatures and light, uneven rooting, and then not uncovering the tips. And we'll show some images as we go through of what that looks like when you stick your cuttings and you've got a lot of leaf overlap and the growing tips are covered. Okay, I don't have any questions that have come in at this point, so I'm going to turn it over to Roger and we'll continue on with the presentation.
Okay, let's get prepared for receiving the cuttings. Sanitation, as Rebecca said, very important to start out with a clean, disinfected greenhouse. There's various chemicals like Green Shield, chlorine, Macasan, or Physan that can be used to help clean. You should power wash, make sure the debris is removed from previous crops first, and then get in with the disinfectants and make sure that you've got the surfaces nicely cleaned off and disinfected. Don't leave any residues that come in contact with the plants from herbicides that you might be using between crops. Be very careful of herbicide residues. You'll want to rinse also after you use some of these chemicals just to get them off the surface, and at that point you'll be clean enough and ready to go ahead and set out your media and start propagating. Pay special attention to pipes and drains. Oftentimes there's algae and dirt in those that can house especially fungus gnats and the larvae, so that gives them a place to sort of wait over until you start planting cuttings. So very important to make sure those are clean. And of course, always, every day and every time you move from section to section, make sure that your workers are starting with clean hands and clean tools. Keep antibacterial soap in the work area and handy and convenient for the workers. And leaf pick any yellow leaves while sticking cuttings. It's important to remove damaged debris if you can while you're sticking, and be careful when you remove a leaf to leave a little bit of the petiole remaining. It'll fall off later, but that way you won't bruise the stem. Also, while you're sticking, be careful not to squeeze the stem of the cutting, as that can allow for a point of entry for Erwinia or bacterial infection right where the squeeze occurs. So be very careful. A practice that we've used, and I know many of our growers that we visited use, is to use lime on the floor to help keep the algae down and give you some insect control, at least initially. Makes for a much cleaner propagation environment where you don't have concrete floors, and keeps the algae back. Conditions in the summer are ideal for algal growth and for fungus gnats under those benches. So just one way to keep the greenhouse clean and well prepared for propagation. You can track your shipment before it even arrives. We have a special program on time with Freight Logistics web tracking. So you can use your Ecke order number or broker PO number and track your shipment at www.ecke.com. If you have any difficulty with this or need help, you can call our customer service department and someone will walk you through the process. But very useful if you're wondering where your shipment is. It can be tracked after the cutting starts while the order is anywhere in process on its way to you. Handling the cuttings on arrival is extremely important. And it looks like in the eastern part of the U.S. right now anyway, we have a real major heat wave going on. So unlike 2009, it looks like 2010 could be a hotter summer. So how you handle these cuttings is critical in the first minutes and hours before you actually get them planted. We do suggest that you get them out and into a cooler if you can't plant them right away, or if they arrive warm. It's a good idea to get them cooled down before planting. We suggest that you have good humidity in the cooler, but certainly keeping those plastic bags wrapped around the trays of cuttings help keep those damp papers that we wet when we pack the cuttings nice and moist, until you get to pull them out and take them out to propagation. We do not recommend that you place all your cuttings out in the propagation area and stick them when you can. You're better off to keep them in the cooler and maybe take them out an hour at a time and plant them right away. A cooler cutting does better stored in a cooler than it does stored on your propagation bench laid out. Labels are very important in tracking the product and, of course, keeping it straight. These white labels come with your orders, so we can go to the next slide here. And you can see a white number. It's this piece of paper, and that has the crew member number on it. It's an excellent way for us to track the order and who the cutter was from the stock plants in Guatemala. So if there's problems, we can trace right back to the person who took the cuttings for your order. And in the next slide, you can see both together a nice clear shot of the cutter number 278 and the crew and product number, location that the stock is located, where the cuttings were taken, and so forth. So what you can do is, as you stick the cuttings, just stick these in nearby media, and you can lay those little pieces of paper right on top of the leaves, and if any problems occur, within a few days, those will certainly survive in the mist, and if there's a problem, you can just track that for us and give us those numbers, and we can get to the root cause of any problems you may be having. Best handling practices for cuttings: open the box and record the temperature. If the cuttings arrive hot, very important to get them in the cooler. And if they arrive hot and dry for some reason, maybe the box was damaged and opened and the contents dried out, good idea to get them hosed down in the cooler and wet. Let them get their turgor restored before you go ahead and stick them. You can remove your bags, as you saw in the previous photo, and place on racks in a cooler. Good temperature overall is 50 degrees. We don't recommend 45 because there can be cooling damage, chilling damage to the cutting. Keep the humidity high if you can, and remove no more than can be stuck in an hour, as I said before. You don't want them sitting out there in the propagation area unattended, stacked on top of each other, waiting to be planted any longer than you have to. And when you plant, it's a good idea to plant sensitive varieties first, and that's often the non-reds, light-leafed varieties, and the novelties. And all cuttings should be stuck within 24 hours for sure. So it doesn't matter what time of day you stick, as long as you have control over the moisture and the heat, and your workers are reasonably comfortable as well. So keep the mist going right away, and you can use a lot of mist in the first 24 hours. The goal is to get those leaves standing up as quickly as you can. Any questions?
Yep, it looks like we do have a couple that have come in. Regarding the image that we showed of the lime on the floor, what kind of lime do we recommend to be used when we're using it for algae control?
Yeah, we recommend a hydrated lime for that, which can be purchased in many different locations that carry lime. It's sort of like a whitewash type of a lime, and it makes a good slurry that can be pumped out onto the floor with a special pump. One trick with that, though, is don't leave it in the hose or in the tank or in the pump for any length of time without agitation, because the material will settle and then can become almost like cement in the line. So you want to make sure you flush them out and keep those lines clear. But it's an excellent way and inexpensive way to control algae and fungus gnat larvae.
Okay, this is a good question that's come in. So inevitably in the summertime, sometimes cuttings are going to arrive warm, no matter how hard we try to keep that cold chain managed. If the cuttings came in and they've stuck their soil probe or temperature probe, whatever they're using, into the boxes, and they see that it's warmed up to 85 degrees, what harm is there in putting the cuttings in a 50-degree cooler right away. I mean, that rapid temperature change, is there any repercussions from that, or is that the best thing to do?
No, I think as long as those cuttings are in their plastic bag so they don't dehydrate rapidly, getting them into the cool temperature will definitely be better for them to get them cool as quickly as possible, because they're burning carbohydrates and you're creating an opportunity for the warm favored bacteria to proliferate within the plants. So I would go ahead and get them cooled down. It's a good idea to stack them in such a way that there's some air movement between the trays, understanding that the way they're packed in such a density, it'll take a few hours before this core and center of those trays cools down as well. But here's the key too. Don't go lower than 50 degrees. 50 degrees is a safe temperature, and the temperature can drop right down to 50 degrees even fairly quickly. But 65 degrees, of course, would be a lot slower. So 50, maybe 55 degrees in the cooler is ideal and won't shock the plants. But don't go lower than that. Colder temperatures are not better, not for poinsettias.
Okay, we've had a lot of questions come in about specific products used for sanitation and for, the antibacterial soaps. One of the brands here that was listed was Sanitate that this person is asking about. As Roger said, there are a lot of different products available that can be used. Just have to make sure that they're labeled for greenhouse use and read the instructions thoroughly to make sure that if the product needs to be rinsed after you've applied it, that you do that. And then, the antibacterial hand soap, there's a lot of products available, and any number of them will work equally well. Okay, the rest of the questions that have come in, it looks like we'll address as we get through the presentation. So with that, we'll go ahead and move on. And I'm going to walk us through the process of actually sticking the cuttings. Rooting hormone is not necessary for successful poinsettia rooting. We do find that most of our cultivars root very nicely without the use of rooting hormone. However, there are some cultivars like Winter Rose. Prestige is one that we do feel benefits from the use of rooting hormone. We do feel that it enhances uniformity to rooting, and it decreases the total amount of time to rooting. And so in our minds, rooting hormone is a beneficial part of your practice. A good product to consider would be Dip and Grow. We mix our own rooting hormone at the ranch, but Dip and Grow is the one that's most commonly used. You want to start with 1 part Dip and Grow and 20 parts water, and then your finished solution ends up being 500 parts per million IBA and 250 parts per million NAA. You want to make sure that you're rapidly dipping the cuttings. You only dip the base of the cutting in the solution for just a second. It's tempting, to try to come up with different methods to get that rooting hormone on there quickly. And believe me, if you stick that entire cutting in that solution, you're going to end up with twisted petioles and distortion. You can get, kind of a weird thing that Roger likes to call chicken legs, where it looks like little goosebumps on the stem. That's all from excess hormone. So it's really important to train, the people that are sticking, that you're just dipping the very base of that cutting, and real rapidly. So this is one of the things that we mentioned at the very beginning of the presentation about covering the tips of the cuttings and the repercussions of what can happen if you're not careful when you're sticking those cuttings and positioning them in the strips. And you can see here that you've got lots of leaf overlap. You've got some big mature leaves covering those brand new tips, and what can happen there is that cutting that's got its tip covered, it's going to slow rooting significantly. You'll start to get stretch of the cuttings that are rooting, and you'll start to get the cuttings with leaf overlap that are behind, and you end up with that uneven growth. And so this next picture here is a good example of, how you should stick the cuttings. It's a little bit more time consuming to make sure that you're positioning those cuttings correctly so that you don't have leaf overlap, but you'll definitely see the results in the end with more even growth if you pay close attention to that and make sure that tips aren't covered. Planting depth is also really important. We've got a side shot here of cutting stuck in Oasis. The cutting to the right is at the proper depth, where it's just down to about the middle of the Oasis cube. The cutting to the left is too deep. One of the things that's going to happen with this cutting on the left is you'll probably lose that leaf where the petiole is down below the Oasis. And then when you lose that leaf, number one, it results in more labor because you're going to have to go back through and pick yellow leaves that you've lost. And then it also does increase the risk of disease like botrytis and erwinia when you've got that damaged tissue like that. So it's real important to pay close attention to sticking depth. And then Roger also already mentioned this about pressing too hard and properly handling the cuttings. You can see here that, you know, this cutting was really stuck into that oasis and pinched hard. And what can happen is that you know, even though it doesn't look like you've done any damage, you've damaged that tissue there, and it can open the cutting up to things like erwinia and botrytis. And so it's really important to handle those cuttings with care and make sure that you're not pinching too hard. And, you know, even when cuttings are being held in hands to be sticky, you know, when they're waiting to be stuck, you're not, you know, grasping the cuttings too hard. Just proper handling techniques is what we want to think about here. And stick-sensitive varieties first. It's a good idea to have, you know, maybe have your list ready and have know what varieties are coming and have your sticking order ready to go, because this image here, it looks like it's a pink variety or a white variety that was probably not stuck in the right order. It maybe waited until the very end when it should have been one of the first to be stuck, and it's obviously showing more signs of stress. Roger talked a little bit about On Time, our tracking program. One of the things that you can do with that is once the cuttings have actually shipped, you can download your packing slip. So if you're receiving 20 boxes, you can know exactly what's in each of those boxes, and then you can plan your sticking order accordingly and stick your most sensitive varieties first. We'll talk a little bit about direct sticking. One of the biggest mistakes that can be made with direct sticking is that the media is just too wet, and then when you have too wet media with direct sticking, it's obviously going to slow rooting significantly, and fungus gnats can be a real concern. So we do recommend moistening the soil just to a medium level before the cuttings are stuck, and then it's real important to dibble a hole just a little bit larger than the cutting diameter. If you don't dibble a hole and you're kind of jamming those cuttings into the media, you're obviously going to damage the media, and then there's not any airspace around the base of the cutting, and that reduced compacted media can really slow rooting. Then you want to stick the cutting but not water the cutting in. When you're direct sticking, you're going to be misting the cuttings just like you would in a regular propagation area, so we don't recommend sticking the cuttings and then watering them in. After callus formation is when you water in and start with a nutrient solution. So, you know, it's going to be 10 to 14 days before you actually water those cuttings in, and until that time you're relying on mist to keep those cuttings turgid. This is a real good picture here of an example of what happens when you do water the cuttings in. You can see that this cutting was, number one, stuck too deep, and then number two, it was likely watered in overhead rather than relying on the mist, and you know, there's going to be some real problems here. The growing tip is completely covered. In terms of misting guidelines, one of the most important things is to make sure that you have that mist ready to go and the environment ready to go before the cuttings are stuck. One of the worst things that could happen is you're sticking cuttings and you don't have the mist system ready, you don't have the shade on, you don't have the temperature right, you don't have the humidity up, and then any amount of stress that those cuttings are under right away can have a real effect on the success of propagation. So it's real important to have the environment ready to go as you're sticking cuttings, and especially the mist. Mist frequency is going to vary significantly from greenhouse to greenhouse depending on things like light levels, temperatures, humidity, and air movement. And so, you know, what your ideal mist should be is going to vary depending on how your greenhouse is set up and what the environment's like. But ideally what the mist should accomplish is that it should supply a constant film of moisture on the leaf surface. So we want a nice, smooth film of water on that leaf surface. We want to maintain the relative humidity at 100% or near 100%, and then ideally we're supplying little or no water to the rooting medium. If the rooting medium is oversaturated before callus formation and before there's sufficient roots there, then you're really going to start to slow that rooting process up. This is just a sample misting schedule. Again, I can't stress enough that it's going to vary depending on greenhouse environments, but typically what we would recommend is for day 1 through 3, you're misting every 10 minutes for 10 seconds. And then, you know, you can see as the days go on and callus formation's there and you start to get roots, you're increasing the amount of time between mist cycles, but you're keeping it at 10 seconds. Hopefully by day 1 through 7, night mist is probably going to be required. Typically it's 3 times during the night for 10 seconds. Hopefully by day 8 we've got some callus formation and that cutting's able to maintain its turgor during the night and the callus is there, and it can take up water through that callus tissue, and so hopefully after 1 week night mist can stop. But again, that's going to vary on depending on what your temperatures are like at night, how much air movement there is, how stressed the cuttings were to begin with. This picture here is a good example of water management and what can happen with waterlogged, if there's too much mist and if the media is waterlogged. On the left, that's a normal cutting where once the root initiation was there and the roots started to work their way out into the cell, you can see you've got nice fine root hairs and it's really starting to circle. This is where mist system was adequate and it wasn't, there wasn't too much mist or too little mist. The cutting on the right, however, was probably waterlogged, and you can see that there's that absence of fine root hairs. The roots are there, and eventually this cutting will be okay, but in the absence of those fine root hairs, establishing just isn't going to be as good when you transplant as it would be. Some misting tips. You should always know what your water quality is like. Poor water quality can negatively impact the cuttings. So, it's a good idea to have a water report run every year and have your water quality checked just so that you can see if there's been any changes or any problems that you need to address. Acidification is real common in the greenhouse to neutralize alkalinity. We do not recommend using phosphoric acid. We'll talk later in the presentation about what too much phosphorus can do in propagation. So things like citric or nitric acid are more commonly used in propagation. Xerotol is something that a lot of growers commonly use. Just keep the rate low. We recommend a dilution rate of 1 to 1,000 injected in the mist, and this can reduce the incidence of disease and algae growth. It's a good method of sanitation. You need to be able to adjust the misting schedule accordingly depending on varying light levels. So, those first few days, especially when we're trying to keep those cuttings turgid, adjusting the mist several times throughout the day might be necessary. And midday wilt is normal to see in the first few days. Those cuttings go through kind of what we call an ugly duckling phase where they're turgid but they just don't look great. That's pretty common. What you do want to avoid is leaf roll, which indicates that the misting frequency needs to be increased or that it's too bright or there's too much air movement. This next picture here is an example of what the leaf roll looks like, and there could be a lot of things going on here. It could be too bright, could be that the relative humidity is too low, too much airflow. It's just that the environment's not quite what it needs to be, and then you'll see this leaf roll as a result. We'll talk a little bit about foliar wetting agents. Some growers, swear by foliar wetting agents, and some growers have never used them, not sure if they need to. It's not proven that foliar wetting agents are actually needed. However, some growers do feel that it might help regain turgor faster. It may be useful if your water quality is not great or if you're using a misting system that has a larger water droplet. It does help break down those drops, and the goal again is to form that nice film across the leaf. We don't want it beading up and we don't want droplets because it's the leaf is not as effective at absorbing that moisture when it's beaded up like that. We do recommend using foliar wetting agents sparingly. It's been our experience that the labeled rates are higher than what's typically necessary to be effective, and that you can also see some damage, and so you just need to be real careful. Know what's effective with your own water, and then what rate is effective, and then just make sure that you're not using more than that. And that's why we recommend starting with a low rate and increasing gradually until you get the desired effect on the leaf. Capsule is one of those common wetting agents out there that most growers use. When you're trying to decide whether to use capsule or not, what is your mist, what's the mist look like and what's the water look like on the leaves if you're not using capsule? In this picture here, you can see that it is beating up pretty significantly, so capsule is probably necessary. Do the leaves stay turgid without the use of capsule? Maybe you can get by without using it. It is an additional cost. And then you do have to think about the interaction with chemical sprays. You do have to be careful with capsule and some of your growth regulator applications. And then also a lot of the fungicide and insecticides can't be used with silicone-based products. And so you have to think about that and plan your chemical rotation accordingly. Just another picture here of, this is an example where capsule is not being used, and just so you can see quite a bit of beading on the leaf surface. And again here, and this is a great picture because it's got that little cutter number on there, and how Roger mentioned that you can just place that on top of the cuttings and it'll hold up for a few days there. And then of course it's really important tracking information if we need to, we need to find out if there was some issues with that cutting. Okay, we've got some time to address questions. Roger, while I go through and look through questions, do you have any comments?
Yeah, I just want to highlight the importance of the first 30 minutes or first 4 hours after you stick the cuttings. I know oftentimes there's workers in the propagation area. No one likes to run the mist on them. And, you know, it's difficult to maintain the moisture on the cuttings, but it really needs to be applied at that time more than ever. So maybe I've seen sometimes the workers will have on some rain gear. Oftentimes there's someone assigned to go through with a hose and just have them step back for a few seconds while they go in and fog and mist the cuttings. But if those leaves start to curl up like taco shells that were in that photo that Rebecca just showed, you know, that's a clear sign that you're just too dry, and that desiccation can take, you know, maybe even days to recover from, and you lose propagation time, and it helps to support uneven rooting of the block of cuttings that you planted. So get that moisture in there right away. Put extra shade on the roof, or pull your black cloth closed if you have it a bit, or whatever it takes, because there's not much photosynthesis going on then anyway. And keep it cool and keep those cuttings wet, especially that first 24 hours is absolutely critical.
Okay, we've got some questions that have come in here about volume per square inch of mist that should be applied, or lots of different questions about mist that have come in regarding, you know, how mist systems are set up in various times that the mist runs for. This particular person here has their mist run for 30 seconds. Another one has theirs run for 20 seconds, and everyone's just wondering if that's okay. I think, again, the key message here in terms of volume of mist and how much you need to run the mist is all going to vary depending on environmental conditions and what you're actually trying to achieve based on your environment. And so, you know, whether you run for 10 seconds every 10 minutes or 30 seconds every 30 minutes, it's just going to depend a lot on how your environment is and how well you're able to manage that environment. You know, you need to be paying real close attention to the moisture in the media, and that's really going to give you a gauge. You know, like Roger said, if those leaves are rolling, if there's signs of obvious stress, that means that your mist is probably inadequate. If it doesn't look like there's stress, but your media is really oversaturated, you know, you shouldn't be able those first few days to go in and squeeze a lot of moisture out of that media. That's going to be an indication that you're probably using too much mist. Any more comments there, Roger? I know it ends up being kind of a vague answer because there's not really one right or wrong answer when it comes to mist, other than just, you know, how the cuttings look and monitoring moisture levels in the soil.
Well, the goal is to maintain a film of moisture on there and keep those leaves so that they're laying out flat and the turgor's improved and they start photosynthesis as quickly as possible. So if you have large water droplets, as Rebecca said, using a capsule or aqua grow or wetting agent in there can be very useful. Just be careful not to over apply, and it's good not to let the cuttings dry down too much after you've applied those materials as well. They can actually help to desiccate the tissue. You know, in the summertime when there's a lot of air movement and lower humidity, if you don't keep it wet, it can do some strange things to poinsettia leaves for sure.
Okay, in the interest of respecting everybody's time, we're going to keep moving here. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Roger, and we'll go through some photos of what cuttings should look like week by week and what you can expect.
Okay, really important here to keep track of the progress of the cuttings and make sure that they're forming callus, healing, and rooting out on a deliberate schedule. Here, during week 1, you'll see the healing start, some swelling at the base of the cutting. And again, if there's been a problem with squeezing the stem or high temperatures and maybe not the cleanest greenhouse with those high temperatures that we're experiencing right now, you can get Erwinia in them pretty easy. So this is a good time to check, watch for Erwinia. Botrytis isn't usually much of an issue in week 1. A little early to get involved in leaf pick. So the goal here is to just get the cutting standing up and recovered from the shipping process. This cutting looks nice and clean. You got a nice straight cut across the bottom of the cutting there. Important to look for that. We don't want jagged edges. And you got plenty of room there at the base of the cutting below the leaf to plant right into the media. And here in week 2, you begin to see not only callus but some root initiation starting to come out. So by day 7, you should have good callus, and you know, in 10 to 12 days or so, you might see some roots starting to come out of the cuttings as you see in this photo. Nice healthy root initials, plenty of them. Stem swollen just the right amount to produce a good callus, and this cutting's well on its way to go ahead and root out very quickly. By week 3, you should have roots to the outside of the cube or the media, and you can see here a really nice active root system. Hasn't been waterlogged. Certainly the misting looks like it's been good. Maybe a leaf was lost at the base of the cutting there, but otherwise this cutting looks really healthy. I imagine the top here is in good condition. And helps to support a good healthy root system. If your roots don't look like this by week 3, check your temperatures, go back and check your records. Maybe they dried out too much, the mist wasn't good, maybe didn't skip the hormone application to the base of the cutting. There's just a number of different factors that can delay the rooting, but this is certainly by week 3 where you want to be at. And in week 4, what's happened here, the roots have gotten denser, and the goal during week 4 is to tone it and prepare it for the transplant process. So by then, the mist should be extremely infrequently, maybe just a few times a day before you remove the cuttings from propagation, and you want to get them toned. The tissue has been softened, and there's been some leaching that's occurred from the mist, so hopefully at about day 7 you're starting your fertility and starting to build back, get some photosynthesis, and build a good healthy root system like you see here. That cutting's just primed and ready to go. Here's a nice shot. This is in a small cell, looks like maybe an elipot, perlite peat moss type of media, nice and loose and open, good pore space. Very important, especially with poinsettias, that the media not have too many fines in it or be too compacted and lack adequate pore space. When there is lack of oxygen around the base of a poinsettia cutting, it tends not to callus and stalls. So if you ever get a real slow callus formation and the cutting just seems to sit, oftentimes it's an extremely wet condition with lack of oxygen around the base of the cutting. Here's another nice cutting coming out of propagation with a nice healthy white root system. The laterals there, the side shoots you can see are already starting to develop. And you might be concerned, there's a little bit of yellowing in the leaf up there, but with a good fertility program starting at 7 to 10 days, this plant's actually building back its nutrition levels, and those leaves were leached a bit, but you can see some green coming along the veins, and they'll green up. Warm summer temperatures and a good feed program, they'll green right up for you, and you shouldn't be too concerned. What I like about this photo is, too, that the mist was controlled very nicely. If you look at the lower leaves, they are not leached and scarred and burned. They look very healthy and green and actively growing. So the grower here has done a good job of not applying too much mist and leaching all the nutrients out of the leaves. Any questions?
Let's see. Most of the questions that have come in looks like we're going to address as we get through the presentation, and so I think we'll hold off and see if we can address those questions as we go through. Okay, with that we're going to go through and talk about environmental management. First thing that we want to point out here is, especially we talked about media temperatures, it's a good idea to keep the media warm so that you get faster rooting and more uniform rooting when you're using bottom heat. But don't guess. Just thinking that your media is the temperature that it is not accurate. Depending on how much mist you're using, mist is cooling the media, and so the media might not be as warm as you think it is. It's a good idea to use a digital thermometer to check soil temps, and you'll want to do this several times throughout the day as your mist cycles vary. You can also use those digital thermometers to check the temperature of the boxes. It's a good idea right away to stick that probe in the box and just find out what the temperature was of your cuttings when they arrived, so you can use this soil thermometer for dual purposes. Infrared thermometers are also becoming very common and work equally well. Ideal light levels in the propagation area should be 1,200 to 1,500 foot candles. If they're less than 1,000, you're going to start to see some stretch, particularly on some of those more vigorous varieties, and it's also going to slow rooting. When that cutting isn't getting enough light to photosynthesize properly, it is going to slow rooting. If light levels are more than 1,800 foot candles, this is going to require excess mist, and you'll probably see some things like foliage burn, bleaching, or scarring when the light levels are higher. We did have a question come in earlier specific to light levels and wondering if that 1,800 foot candles that we're recommending is an average or if that's the exact level that you should see at all times. You know, just by saying it's an average, that would imply that, you know, it could get up to 2,200 foot candles at one point during the day and down to 1,500 foot candles at another point, averaging 1,800. But really, that's not a good way to look at it, because, you know, if those light levels are excessive at one point in time, it only takes a few minutes in a hot summer greenhouse with too much light to damage those cuttings. And so it really is important to monitor your light levels and keep them below 1,800 foot candles at all times. And again, it's really important because too much mist is going to result in nothing but disease problems, so slow rooting, and then it also leaches nutrients excessively. So light levels, you want to keep it at an adequate level so that the cutting can still go through its metabolic processes, but not enough that it's stressing that cutting out. That's why a light meter is a great idea. Just as important as an EC meter is later in production, and a light meter is really important. And again, being out there several times during the day and checking where those light levels are at is really important, especially in, you know, lots of different areas of the country. We can get some pretty rapid changes in light levels and temperatures throughout the day in the summer months. And so, you know, these first few days in the greenhouse until those cuttings can stand up a little on their own, it's really important to be out there almost hourly checking on things like light levels and soil temp and air temperatures. Light management, this is just a reminder that, you know, in most areas of the country you're going to need some shade on your south, east, and west walls, and have that shade ready to go as you're sticking the cuttings. In terms of temperature management, best callus formation occurs when the media is between 72 and 78 degrees. So again, that's where that bottom heat comes in, and making sure that your mist is not cooling the media excessively and checking your temperatures routinely. Day temperatures, we like to see them range from 76 to 82 degrees. We know that it can be tough to propagate poinsettias in the summer month and that your temperatures can be warmer than that, but that's kind of the goal. We like to see it not above 82 if possible. Night temperatures can range from 70 to 74 degrees, and we have found that keeping your night temperatures at the cooler end of that range for the first 3 days does help alleviate unnecessary stretch on those cuttings. And in the first week, Erwinia is always a concern, and if temperatures are consistently above 80 degrees in those first 5 days, that's when Erwinia can be exaggerated. It seems to be more active and the cuttings are more stressed at warmer temperatures, and so if you can keep that day temperature below 80 degrees, that's ideal and will really help alleviate stress on the cuttings. Temperatures outside the optimal range are going to slow rooting and reduce uniformity, especially cool temperatures. So if you're in an area of the country where you're getting some cool days and some naturally cool nights, you know, if those temperatures are especially cooler than what we're recommending, you could definitely see some slow rooting. In week 3, once the cuttings are nicely rooted, you can probably turn that bottom heat off and reduce the, you know, the air temperatures by 5 degrees and tone that cutting and get it ready for transplant. Humidity management is also really important. As we said, the goal in those first few days is to have at or near 100% relative humidity, and you want that humidity there and ready to go when you're sticking the cuttings. This picture here is just an example of some different ways that you can manage the humidity. This particular grower was growing on wire mesh benches, and, you know, with the airflow, the increased airflow that's coming up from underneath those benches, they used just a poly plastic with some holes punched so that there's a place for the water to drain to reduce that airflow, and it kind of creates a nice little microclimate for the cutting. So, you know, there's lots of different ways to manage that humidity. Some growers will put you know, poly over the top of the cuttings. There's just lots of different ways depending on how your greenhouse is set up to keep that humidity high. This picture here is an example of leaf scarring that will occur if the relative humidity is low. There's too much moisture, too much air movement, probably too much light levels. You can just see that you get some real rough kind of appearance and what looks like physical damage to the cuttings, but it's often just because the environment is too harsh for that cutting. And gradual changes in environment. You know, we talked about toning in week 3 and increasing to possibly higher light levels, reduced temperatures. That all needs to be gradual changes, and you need to make sure that the cutting is ready. When you do things like reduce mist, increase airflow, all of those changes that you want to make those gradual changes and make sure that the cutting's acclimated properly to the changing conditions before you do that. Otherwise, you're going to see some excessive leaf roll. You know, you've got some leaf scarring here, some yellowing taking place, even some distortion because that cutting was just too stressed at one point. Okay, any comments while I'm looking through the questions, Roger?
Yeah, you mentioned something about the light levels, and I think it's interesting. Many growers do use higher light levels than 1800 foot candles, but some varieties are more tolerant of those high light levels. Certainly the colors and the novelty types are more sensitive to the high light levels versus, for example, a Prestige or a Freedom Red. So just something to think about as you have a mixture of cuttings. You need to have a light level that satisfies most of your population as best you can without causing damage to any of the population that you planted. And also the days are long in the summer, and you don't need a lot of light intensity to get a lot of photosynthesis when you're propagating in July. Very much unlike propagating in February in the dead of winter. So just something to think about. There's plenty of light for photosynthesis at 1800 foot candles, and it does allow you to reduce the mist level and the amount of leaching and foliar problems you may have from too wet a leaf condition.
Okay, we've had some questions here come in again about light levels and, you know, what we're recommending for light levels. Ideal media temperature, just a reminder again that that's between 72 and 78 degrees on the media temperature. We've had a lot of questions come in about fertilizer and fertilizer in the mist, and we do have a section coming up about fertilizer, and so we'll wait to address those questions. At this point, Roger's going to talk with us about growth regulating.
Okay, we get a lot of questions about, you know, what kind of growth regulators to use. It is warm in the greenhouse in the summer and humid, and the conditions are ideal for stretch. For many of the cuttings of medium vigor, average vigor, we would recommend maybe doing 2 sprays of growth regulators. First one in about a week to 10 days, and the second one in about a week to 10 days after that. And what that does is just helps to keep them from jumping a little bit in prop, especially the cuttings that are first to root are also first to start to grow, and they may kind of outrun some of the laggards in the group. So really important, use the rooting hormone, help the callus and the root formation be uniform and on the same time for all cuttings. And also if you're looking at the cuttings and you're thinking, well, maybe they don't really need it, I'll skip it, suggest you not skip the first spray, because if you do, you can get this uneven growth, as you can see here in the picture. Cuttings on the left there, you know, are definitely shorter, maybe almost half the size of the ones in the middle of the strip. And if the application is made at that 10-day stage early on in propagation, you tend to have a more even response of the cuttings, and the uniformity remains the same without the internode stretch that you see there. So very important to do the first application on varieties that need it. Good application would be to use a Cycocel or Cycocel plus B9. You can use just Cycocel. Many growers do, but realize that we are providing this information to growers anywhere from, you know, up in the northern part of the country to down in the Gulf states and Florida. So way different conditions and way different needs for growth regulators in those different climates. But of course, you generally will need to do higher application rates or more applications as you head south into the heat and humidity of the deep south. So the first spray, as I said, is most important for uniformity, and if you're uncertain about the need, maybe just skip that second spray. So depending on the cultivar that you're growing, you could skip using the B9 even and just use Cycocel, and we've got some rates coming up in the next slides. B9 at 1,200 to 2,500 parts per million can be tank mixed with Cycocel at 750 to 1,500 parts per million, and rates are going to vary by conditions and by variety. So Again, good to do your own trials, learn in your own greenhouse with the kind of climate you have, the light levels, the height of the roof, the temperatures that you're able to maintain, whether or not you have fan and pad cooling. All these things affect the rooting speed of the cuttings. So you need to work with them, do some trials, maybe even take a few cuttings and don't spray them at all and see what happens, and just get a good feel for what you need to do on your special conditions in your greenhouses based on your glazing and the other factors that can affect the need for growth regulators at all. Here, growers have tried products that are often used on the finished crop. Magic at very low rates might work, but it's difficult to apply materials that are absorbed only in the stem in propagation, since the propagation density is so high, especially in liner production. It's hard to target the chemical just to the stems. And then if you do get it in, maybe it's going to run down into the media and you end up with an over-application or uneven application. So some cuttings get more chemical than others that are even nearby. Here you can see with 5 parts per million on the Magic clubby roots to the right, but to the left there at 10 parts per million, they're like twice as clubby, very fat roots. So if you have the Paclo type materials, Magic or Bonsai, and you try to use those and you see this kind of a root result, that's often just from too high a rate of application of those chemicals. Here's a nice photo of some product stuck on June the 6th, picture taken on June 22nd, and they'll be plenty toned and ready to go on July the 4th for shipping. So this is the goal that you have, is to have this level tabletop, very uniform rooting response, despite the fact that there are differences in the cuttings. Certainly those growth regulator applications, especially that first one, can help you achieve this kind of leveling of the crop, which makes it much easier to finish and grade and transplant. Any questions?
No, it doesn't look like we've had any growth regulator questions come in at this point. Lots of questions about fertility, which is not our next section. I thought it was. We're going to do insect and disease first, and then we'll go to fertility, and there's lots of questions about fertility. Insects and disease management is incredibly important. One of the major insects that's going to be a concern in the propagation environment would be fungus gnats, and especially if you're direct sticking where there's a lot of that wet organic matter, fungus gnats can be a real problem. Or if you're propagating in elepots and you're using a media, fungus gnats can be a problem. So the first step in preventing fungus gnats is going to be sanitation and algae control. And we've given you some tips about different products to use for algae control, including the lime, but sanitation in the greenhouse and making sure that there's not standing water, that there's proper drainage, that there's not drainage issues, and that there's water standing. Any weeds in the greenhouse should be removed, any algae cleaned up. All that should be done before the cuttings arrive so that you don't have problems with fungus gnat larvae and the adults. Moisture management is going to be key. Fungus gnats need wet media to thrive, and so if you're managing the mist or the mist system properly and you're managing your moisture levels properly, hopefully fungus gnats won't be an issue. If they have been an issue in your production environment before, insecticides are probably a good idea, and you do need to use a rotation of different insecticides so that you don't run into issues with resistance. The list of chemicals that I'll give you is just an example. There are a lot of products available that are labeled for use on both fungus gnat larvae and adults. Some commonly used products would include Duragard, Safari, and Distance. But again, there are a lot of chemicals available for use. Rotation is always key to make sure that you're not having problems with resistance, and read the label, because the labels do change every year and sometimes twice a year. They'll come out with different methods of application, different rates, and different restrictions and things like that. So always read the label from season to season and make sure that it's fresh in your mind how that chemical should be used. Foliar diseases are going to be your biggest concern in the propagation environment. Leaf picking will reduce the incidence of botrytis. One of the questions that had come in earlier was regarding when your cuttings do come in warm, aside from getting them out of the boxes and putting them in the putting them in the cooler and misting them, what other things can be done to mitigate the damage that happens to that cutting? And leaf picking is really important. If your cuttings do get heated up, one of the things that you're probably going to see, and we'll show a picture of later, is a marginal yellow that kind of starts in the middle and works its way out, and eventually that leaf will upsize. Well, if you don't pick that leaf, secondary botrytis infection is going to set in, and then that's the biggest risk to the cutting. And so, if cuttings do get heated up, be ready to leaf pick, because that's probably going to be one of the first things that you'll see happen. You want to avoid excessive temperatures to reduce the incidence of Erwinia. We've already talked about keeping those day temperatures below 80 degrees if you can. And then a weekly fungicide application is probably going to be necessary. Some growers feel like they can manage the mist well, and they've kept the cuttings stress-free, and so there's not any issues with botrytis. But a lot of growers feel that a weekly application is beneficial and probably necessary. Some good chemicals to think about would be Decree, Chipco, Daconil, or Heritage. That's another one that a lot of growers are using. One caution that I would give here is just think about what's going to be applied in terms of growth regulators, what you're using for a spreader sticker, an insecticide, and a fungicide, and just make sure that all those chemicals can be used within a real close period of time on those cuttings. We talked to growers lots of times where they've had damage from a spreader sticker because they were using it in the mist, and then they went ahead and applied a weekly fungicide application of Decree or something like that and used a spreader sticker, and it just ends up being too much on that cutting. So when you're thinking about all this and you're planning your chemical rotation, just keep in mind everything that needs to be applied and the compatibility of all of those different chemicals that need to be applied. This is just a real good picture here of botrytis and what that can look like setting in on the leaf or on the stem. And then Erwinia here, where you just have got complete breakdown of that cutting. You can see that the media is pretty wet here. There's some algae starting to grow, all of the things that can exaggerate Erwinia. But if you've got just complete breakdown of that cutting, that's likely Erwinia. Any questions about disease or insect before we move on? I'm going to look through questions here. Any comments, Roger, before we move on?
Yeah, as you take a look, just one thing to be careful of is in Erwinia control. I already mentioned don't squeeze the stems when you plant the cuttings and don't damage them. Another would be don't pre-wet the media too far in advance. If you can do it within 24 hours of sticking, then you've got basically fresh water and fresh media. In the temperatures that you get in the summer, that media can become kind of soupy and maybe support bacterial growth as it heats up and sits in the stagnant in the greenhouse for too long a period before planting. So just something to think about is don't wet your media too far in advance of planting.
Okay. All right, now we're on to fertility. There have been lots of questions about fertility, so I'll let Roger take this section.
Okay, as I said before, we recommend feeding at 7 to 10 days. By then you've got some good callus formation, and the product, the plants are starting to grow, and you need to support that growth. And there's a lot of misting that goes on in the first 7 to 10 days. You've leached a lot of nutrients out of the leaves. We've done studies and proven that, shown that clearly. So getting the nutrition back into the plant is very important right away. Products up to maybe 5% phosphorus are pretty safe to use and effective. 21-5-20. I know many of you use 18-3-18. A couple good products to use as examples. Keep the ammonium levels down. That helps to reduce the stretch. And the phosphorus, like I said, shouldn't be more than about 5%. You get to 10% and you might be struggling and fighting your growth regulator applications by going with too high a rate of phosphorus. We don't recommend putting fertilizer into the mist. There's a lot of problems that you can get into. Algae is more likely generally in the greenhouse, and then that supports more fungus gnats. Also, phosphorus burns and distorts the tips. So you can see over on the right-hand side there where phosphorus fertilizer has distorted. Now this is later, the cutting's already rooted, but during the propagation phase, those leaves that are halfway between the big ones and the tips are distorted, and that's just from phosphorus residue at the time that the mist was being applied. So It can cause almost like a micronutrient appearing deficiency with some reddening and hardening of the apical meristem area, and that can even cause the death of the apical meristem and stunt the growth of not only the tip at the top but also the laterals that would come out after you pinch. So you need to have a fertilizer that isn't more than about 5% in phosphorus, and not a bad idea when you do apply feed to rinse it off with plain water after you do the application, just to make sure you don't leave a residue on there. It's hard to judge nutrient levels in leaves by color. The color of the leaf varies by variety. It will vary also by light levels. If you grow poinsettias under higher light levels, they tend to be lighter green leaf color, especially the green leaf varieties like the Peter Star group. And there's a shot there. This is not necessarily a nutrition problem that's occurring here. You know, when you see that reddening and bronzing and some of that, the back side of the leaf there looks like it might have some kind of a chemical damage to it. So be careful, you know, doing applications, not to do them during the heat of the day, not to do too many, and you know, make sure you get that fertilizer rinsed off, because these tips should be greener and just softer and more actively growing than you see here. Any questions?
We do have a question that relates to fertilizer and also the media. This person would like to know what we recommend if they're not rooting in oasis and they're using a media like they're using Elapots. What's an ideal medium for rooting poinsettias?
Well, there's been a lot of history and success with using you know, sphagnum peat moss with perlite mixtures with good air porosity. Some growers even root in 100% peat, but that can be ideal for fungus gnats, and if the peat's too fine, you end up choking the pore spaces and you stall and don't get callus. So yeah, that would be something to trial. I think one of the keys to remember is with poinsettias, they do require good porosity, and you're using a lot of mist in the summer. You have to because it's hot, so you can get waterlogged, so you need a good open media to help drain.
Okay. Looks like we addressed all the questions about fertilizer. A lot of people had asked about fertilizer in the mist, and you know, we've addressed that and expressed concerns about fertilizer in the mist. So with that, we'll go ahead and move on in the presentation. We're going to wrap it up today with some images of some common problems in propagation. This is just a real good series of images to show some different examples of what heat stress on the cuttings looks like, what cold damage looks like, and then we'll have some time for some final questions at the end. This picture here is Peter Star Pink, and it's an example where it was too bright and the environmental changes were rapid. We just wrapped up fertility, and as Roger said, you can't use visual symptoms to assume that it's a nutritional problem. It does look like it possibly could be nutritional. It's marginal, intervanal yellowing, which could be something that would indicate a nutritional problem. But in this particular case, it's because of environmental changes and not nutritional. Heat damage in transit. We've had a lot of questions come in today about, how do we know our cuttings got heated up? Well, the first thing obviously is to make sure that you know what the temperature of those boxes were. But this is a real good example of what, what the cuttings will look like if they've been allowed to heat up too much in transit. You'll get that real distinct yellowing down the center of the leaf, and eventually those leaves will abscise. And so that's why leaf picking is very important to reduce the risk of disease to that cutting from those abscising leaves. And this is a picture here of hopefully something that you don't have to see in your propagation environment, but this is an example where cuttings were excessively heated and there's a lot of leaf loss as a result. And so obviously leaf picking is going to have to be, it's necessary here to go through, clean up any leaves that have fallen, probably apply a fungicide application to prevent any botrytis from setting in. And this is an example of a cutting here that's lost just too many leaves. And what you have to think about when your cuttings come in, and if you know that those cuttings have been heated up in transit and you've done everything you can to mitigate the amount of stress that cutting is under, you may still see some leaf loss. And how that cutting performs for you is going to depend on how many leaves are lost. If you lose one leaf on a cutting, the cutting is probably going to root the same amount of time and it'll be just fine. However, if you look at this cutting here and you've lost everything but the growing tip, the cutting will eventually root, but it is going to slow things up. And so The message today would be that evaluate the condition of those cuttings immediately when they come in, and if you're at all concerned and you think that it's excessive and you're losing too many leaves within those first 48 hours, let us know. Because we certainly want to know what we can do to help you be successful with your cuttings. And if it's resulted in the loss of all the leaves on those cuttings, it's going to change your production schedule pretty significantly. So we want to make sure that you're successful. So let us know right away if there's ever issues with the cuttings. This is an example of cold damage in transit. Typically, if the cuttings got too cold in transit, which is not typically what we see this time of year, but there are different circumstances when the cuttings are held that they possibly could have gotten too cold, you'll typically see that damage on the new foliage here, and you can see that with a kind of necrosis. You can see it in the tip of the cutting up in the corner, too, that it just looks like that growing tip is damaged from cold temperatures. Typically with cold temperatures, the repercussions of cold temperatures would be that you might lose that growing tip or you might lose that leaf, if you've gotten freeze damage. This picture here is an example of chemical damage. It looks hard to say what could have happened here with chemicals, whether it's from too much surfactant, whether it's from insecticide or a fungicide application, but this is pretty classic of the kind of burn and scorch that you can see from chemical damage. This picture here is another example of that fertilizer in the mist. This is another good way to drive that message home that we don't recommend fertilizer in the mist. You can, especially with phosphorus, you can definitely see that reddish discoloration, that hardened growth. The tissue's not expanding the way that it should. Also looks like there might be some chemical damage going on here with that reddening in the leaf and that bronzing. Physical damage here, this is just something you can see. Those cuttings have been handled by our cutters. They've been handled when they're packaging. They're handled by the people sticking the cuttings. It's just really important to make sure that you're handling those cuttings carefully. Otherwise, you can see this type of physical damage. You can also see this physical damage when there's too much airflow and the environment is just harsh. All right, I'm going to go through here and look at any last questions that have come in before we wrap up. Roger, any last comments before we sign out for the day?
Yeah, just again on handling the cuttings upon receipt and carefully making sure that you put those labels into the propagation area and that you're watching the mist levels and your light levels very closely, especially in those first few days, is just critically important to success. One bad dry down of the cuttings after you stick them, and they may not recover fully, and they'll be delayed, and you'll just have problems for quite a while afterwards trying to get them restored. So handle them quickly. Time is of the essence, and certainly in the summer the stresses are much higher than unrooted cuttings received in the winter and early spring season for the spring crop. So just something to think about, especially in these July propagations that we're coming up to at this right next week.
All right. Well, it looks like we've addressed the majority of the questions that have come in today in some format or another. Before we let you go for the day, I just want to remind you that we do have technical support available at www.ecke.com, where you can find production guidelines and detailed crop information. We also have on board our live interactive bulletin board where you can get technical support 24/7. It's the industry's largest tech help bulletin board, and we're happy to say we have about 1,500 registered users that are active all the time. We also have On Target, our free poinsettia web-based height tracking program. Now would be a great time to familiarize yourself with that program so you know how to use it when it's time to start tracking height. And as I mentioned, this is the first of a 5-part poinsettia webinar series that we're doing this summer. These dates, and I have dates and topics listed here. The next one will be July 22nd, and that one we're going to talk about optimizing poinsettia branching and all the different aspects that are involved with getting the right architecture on your poinsettia plant. And so watch your emails. You'll receive an email invite from me within the next couple of weeks, and we look forward to having you on that webinar. Also, Roger and I are preparing for what we're calling our Road to Success. We recognize that most of our customers can't participate in pack trials or the spring trials in California in April, and so for the first time we're taking pack trials on the road through a series of different roadshow events throughout the country. Our first inaugural event is next week, next Tuesday, at the University of Georgia in Athens, and then we have, you can see we also have one at Penn State the end of July. Dwayne's Greenhouse in Michigan, August 3rd, Plant Peddler, August 5th in Cresco, Iowa, and Botany Lane Greenhouse in Colorado. And so if you're in the vicinity of any of these roadshows, we'd love to have you. If you do not have information about how to register for the roadshows, you can contact customer service at the Ecke Ranch or myself or Roger, and you should all have my email address from the webinar. You can contact me and I can get you the information you need to register. All right, that concludes today's presentation. We appreciate you spending your time with us today, and we hope that you're successful with your poinsettia propagation, and just know that we're here for you along the way if you have any questions. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.